Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a psychological phenomenon that influences our ability to perceive and interpret information. It occurs when individuals favor information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses, regardless of whether the information is true. The danger of confirmation bias lies in its subtlety and its profound impact on our decision-making processes. When confronted with a piece of information, a person with strong pre-existing beliefs will often interpret ambiguous evidence as supporting their current view. This can lead to a skewed perception of reality, where contradictory evidence is overlooked or dismissed without thorough consideration. For instance, in the realm of investing, a trader might focus solely on positive news about a stock they own, ignoring signs of potential financial trouble in the company. The implications of confirmation bias are extensive, affecting not only individual judgments but also societal discourse. In the age of digital media, this bias can lead to echo chambers, where one only encounters information or opinions that reinforce their own views, further entrenching misconceptions and potentially leading to polarization. Understanding and acknowledging the presence of confirmation bias is crucial for anyone striving for objective decision-making. It necessitates a conscious effort to seek out and consider opposing viewpoints and to evaluate information based on its merits rather than its conformity to one's existing beliefs. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is a cognitive shortcut that involves relying too heavily on the first piece of information we encounter, the anchor, when making decisions. Once an anchor is set, all subsequent judgments are made by adjusting away from that anchor, and there is a strong bias toward interpreting other information around the anchor. For example, if you are negotiating the price of a car and the first price quoted is $30,000, that figure sets the anchor. Any counteroffer or adjustment you make is likely to be influenced by the initial $30,000 figure, even if the true value of the car is significantly lower. This can lead to poor decision-making, where the initial information disproportionately influences the final outcome, regardless of its relevance. Anchoring occurs because it provides a straightforward reference point in complex decision environments. However, it often leads to an over-reliance on initial information and can skew our perception of subsequent data. This bias is particularly prevalent in financial decisions, negotiations, and even first impressions where the initial data point sets a precedent that is tough to shake. To counteract anchoring bias, it is beneficial to be aware of its influence and deliberately adjust your frame of reference by considering a wide range of alternatives before making a decision. This can help in approaching situations with a more balanced perspective and lead to more rational outcomes.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut that relies on immediate examples that come to a person's mind when evaluating a specific topic, concept, method, or decision. This bias occurs because the ease with which examples come to mind convinces us of their typicality and frequency. In essence, if something can be recalled easily, we tend to think of it as more common than it actually is. For instance, after seeing news reports about airplane crashes, individuals might judge air travel as being more dangerous than it actually is, despite statistical evidence showing it as one of the safest modes of transport. This happens because the dramatic and emotional nature of the news story makes such events more memorable, thus more available in our memory. The availability heuristic can lead to a skewed perception of reality, affecting decisions in numerous areas including risk assessment, policy formation, and personal behavior. For example, a person might overestimate the likelihood of dramatic but rare events while underestimating the probability of more common but less sensational issues. To mitigate the effects of the availability heuristic, it's important to seek out objective data and statistical evidence rather than relying solely on anecdotal experiences or media representations. Recognizing this bias can help individuals make more balanced and informed decisions by considering a broader range of information beyond what is most readily available in their minds. Dunning-Kruger Effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias whereby individuals with low ability in a specific task overestimate their own capability, while those with high ability tend to underestimate their competence. This paradoxical effect stems from a basic human inability to possess a true self-awareness of one's own knowledge and skills. Essentially, those lacking in skills fail to recognize their own incompetence, which leads to an inflated self-assessment. This effect was identified by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who observed that the poorest performers in their studies were also the most likely to overestimate their performance relative to others. Conversely, the highest performers were often more aware of the potential for mistakes and thus rated their own skills more conservatively. For example, in a workplace setting, an employee with limited understanding of a complex project might feel overly confident about completing it within deadlines, unaware of the challenges ahead. This can lead to poor decision-making and project failure. On the other hand, a highly skilled employee might underestimate their ability and hesitate to take on leadership roles or advanced tasks. To counteract the Dunning-Kruger effect, continual learning and feedback are essential. Encouraging an environment where constructive criticism is welcomed and where individuals are exposed to the breadth and depth of skills required for particular tasks can help mitigate this bias. Loss aversion. Loss aversion is a cognitive bias that describes why the pain of losing is psychologically more significant than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. This principle is a cornerstone of behavioral economics and explains why people's actions are often more motivated by the fear of losing something than by the prospect of gaining something of equal value. For example, consider two scenarios. In the first, you find $50. In the second, you lose $50. Even though the amount of money involved is the same, the negative feelings associated with the loss are likely to be much stronger than the positive feelings associated with the gain. This asymmetry can greatly influence human behavior. This bias can be observed in various aspects of life, including financial decisions, where investors might irrationally hold on to losing stocks to avoid realizing a loss, or in everyday decisions, where individuals might stick to familiar habits or possessions rather than trying something new that could be potentially more beneficial. Loss aversion leads to risk-averse behavior when dealing with potential gains, but paradoxically, it can lead to risk-seeking behavior when people face the prospect of a certain loss. Recognizing and understanding loss aversion can help in making more balanced decisions, as it encourages a more rational evaluation of the costs and benefits, independent of whether they are framed as gains or losses. Status quo bias. Status quo bias is a cognitive tendency to prefer things to remain unchanged or to maintain a previous decision. This bias leads people to resist changes and favor the familiar, often irrationally avoiding new options or opportunities that could result in significant improvements in their lives. Imagine you're using an old, inefficient software at work because it's what you've always used, even though a new software could dramatically increase your productivity. The preference for the old software, despite its inefficiencies, exemplifies status quo bias. This bias stems from several psychological roots including fear of loss, preference for familiarity, and the effort associated with change. The implications of status quo bias are significant in both personal and professional contexts. It can prevent individuals and organizations from adapting to new environments or technologies, potentially leading to stagnation and missed opportunities. Overcoming this bias involves recognizing the potential benefits of change and the hidden costs of maintaining the status quo. It's also helpful to frame changes in a way that emphasizes their benefits, reducing the perceived risk associated with them. Hindsight bias. Hindsight bias, often referred to as the "I knew it all along" effect, occurs when people believe they could have predicted the outcome of an event after it has happened, even though it was not predictable. This bias can distort our memory of what we actually knew or believed before an event occurred, leading us to overestimate our own foresight or insight. For example, after a company fails, people might claim they saw it coming all along, although they didn't express such predictions beforehand. This bias is not just about being wise after the event, it affects how we learn from experiences and make decisions in the future. By believing we knew the outcome all along, we may not accurately assess risk or make the necessary preparations for potential future outcomes. Hindsight bias can lead to overconfidence in personal judgment and the ability to predict future events, which can be particularly dangerous in high-stakes environments like investing, medical decision-making, or leadership. To counteract hindsight bias, it's important to maintain detailed records of decisions and the reasons behind them at the time they are made. This practice helps to provide a more accurate reflection and evaluation of our decision-making processes over time. In-group bias. In-group bias is the tendency to favor and extend better treatment to those who are perceived as part of our own group, whether defined by ethnicity, nationality, religion, or even shared interests. This bias is rooted in our evolutionary history, where alliance with a group enhanced survival through mutual support and protection. In modern society, however, this bias can lead to partiality and discrimination, affecting judgment and behavior in social interactions. Consider a scenario in a workplace where a manager prefers to promote employees who graduated from the same university as they did, overlooking potentially more qualified candidates from other institutions. This preference isn't about the actual capabilities of the individuals but rather an irrational favoritism towards those who share a common identity. In-group bias can foster cohesion within a group but also contribute to significant social issues such as prejudice, exclusion, and inequity. It impedes objective decision-making and can perpetuate divisions within broader communities. To counteract in-group bias, it's crucial to actively seek diverse perspectives, engage in inclusive practices, and cultivate empathy towards out-group members. Awareness and deliberate efforts to value fairness and diversity are essential steps in overcoming this pervasive bias. Fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error describes our tendency to overemphasize personal characteristics and ignore situational factors when explaining other people's behavior. Essentially, this error leads us to believe that someone's actions depend mainly on what kind of person they are, rather than the circumstances influencing those actions. For instance, if someone cuts us off in traffic, our first reaction might be to think they are a reckless or rude driver. However, we often overlook situational possibilities, perhaps they are rushing to a medical emergency. This bias is less common in our self-assessments, where we are more aware of the external factors affecting our behavior. This cognitive error can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts in interpersonal relationships, as it does not consider the full context of people's actions. It can also result in unfair judgments and a lack of empathy. Overcoming this bias involves making a conscious effort to consider the external factors that might influence people's behavior before forming an opinion about their character. This practice not only leads to fairer evaluations of others but also promotes a more compassionate and understanding approach to social interactions. Sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy occurs when individuals continue an endeavor, or continue using or pursuing an option, because they have invested resources into it, such as time, money, or effort, regardless of whether the future payoff justifies the further investment. This bias can trap people in inefficient or unproductive situations simply because they feel that they've invested too much to quit. For example, imagine you've bought tickets to a concert, but on the day of the event, you feel sick. Despite feeling unwell, you might still go because you feel that not attending would waste the money spent on the tickets. This decision-making ignores the current costs versus current benefits, focusing instead on past, irretrievable costs. The sunk cost fallacy can be particularly detrimental in business or personal investments, where continued investment in failing projects can lead to even greater losses. Breaking free from this fallacy requires acknowledging that sunk costs are past decisions and should not influence ongoing decision-making. The focus should always be on the future benefits and costs, not on recouping what has already been lost. Learning to let go of past investments that no longer promise desirable outcomes is crucial for making rational decisions.